I slept with my billionaire boss, and 9 months later, he found out he was the father. His reaction. The dim lights of Manhattan's skyline pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Callahan Enterprises executive floor, casting long shadows across the empty office space. Alyssa Monique Carter's fingers flew across her keyboard, the gentle tapping echoing in the silence of the late hour. Her corkscrew curls, usually perfectly styled, had started to escape their neat arrangement, framing her face like a rebellious halo. At 26, she had already mastered the art of being indispensable. Every email was perfectly crafted, every meeting meticulously scheduled, every crisis handled before it could reach Nathaniel Callahan's desk. But tonight, something felt different. The air seemed charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the approaching thunderstorm outside. Still here, Ms. Carter. The deep voice sent a shiver down her spine. Nathaniel, Nate. Callahan stood in the doorway of his office, his 6'2" frame cutting an imposing figure against the city lights. His steel blue eyes held that intensity that made billion-dollar deals crumble. But tonight, there was something else there, something raw, less controlled. Just finishing the Anderson merger documents, Mr. Callahan, Alyssa replied, proud that her voice remained steady, despite the way her heart thundered in her chest. The familiar scent of his Bleu de Chanel cologne wrapped around her like a silk scarf, making it harder to maintain her professional facade. Anderson can wait until morning. He loosened his tie, a gesture so uncharacteristic it made her pause. Nate Callahan was always impeccable, always in control. The man who turned Wall Street on its head before he hit 30 didn't do casual, didn't do spontaneous. Yet here he was, his jacket discarded, his crisp white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "I'd rather finish it now," she insisted, forcing her eyes back to the screen. "You have the meeting at 8 a.m., I know." He moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You never forget anything, do you, Alyssa?" The use of her first name made her fingers still on the keyboard. In 2 years of working as his executive assistant, he had never called her anything but Ms. Carter. The change felt intimate, dangerous. "It's my job to remember," she said softly, finally looking up at him. A mistake. His eyes caught hers, and suddenly the spacious office felt too small, too warm. "Is that all this is? A job?" His voice had dropped lower, rougher. He leaned against her desk, close enough that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, another departure from his usual pristine appearance. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face in stark relief. For a moment, Alyssa saw past the powerful CEO facade to the man underneath, the one who worked himself to exhaustion, who carried the weight of a legacy on his shoulders, who looked at her sometimes like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Mr. Callahan." "Nate," he corrected, his hand moving to brush a stray curl from her face. The touch sent electricity through her body, making her breath catch. "Tonight, I'm just Nate." Warning bells rang in Alyssa's head. She had worked too hard to get where she was. Growing up in Brooklyn with her grandmother, she had learned early that success required sacrifice, especially for a black woman in corporate America. One moment of weakness could undo everything she'd built. But when his fingers traced her jawline, those warnings faded to whispers. "This is a bad idea," she breathed, even as she leaned into his touch. "Probably," he agreed, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. "Tell me to stop." She should. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, it all hung in the balance, but the look in his eyes, vulnerable and hungry, matched something deep inside her that she'd been denying for too long. Instead of pushing him away, she rose from her chair, bringing them face to face. The air crackled between them like the storm outside. "I can't," she whispered. His kiss, when it came, was nothing like she'd imagined, and she had imagined it, in moments of weakness she'd never admit to. It wasn't the calculated move of a corporate raider or the polished performance of a society bachelor. It was raw, desperate, like a man starving for something he'd denied himself too long. Her hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. His fingers tangled in her hair, destroying what remained of her careful styling. Neither of them cared. The storm raged outside, but inside that office, a different kind of tempest was brewing, one that would change their lives forever, though neither of them knew it yet. In that moment, there was only this, the taste of his mouth, the heat of his body, the sound of thunder drowning out the last of their reservations. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tomorrow would demand answers. But tonight belonged to them, to the feelings they'd kept buried beneath suits and schedules and professional smiles. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, the realization that some nights change everything, whether you're ready for them to or not. The Anderson merger documents lay forgotten on the computer screen, the cursor blinking steadily in the dim light. Outside, the storm continued to build, nature's own accompaniment to a night that would leave nothing unchanged in its wake. Dawn crept over Manhattan like a cold whisper, painting the sky in shades of steel and pearl. Alyssa blinked awake on the leather couch in Nate's office, her body stiff from sleep. For one disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. His touch, his kisses, the way he'd looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. His suit jacket lay draped over her like a blanket, the fabric still carrying his scent, but Nate himself was nowhere to be seen. The office looked different in the harsh morning light. What had felt intimate and magical last night now seemed stark and corporate. Her reflection in the window showed smudged mascara and disheveled curls, a far cry from her usual polished appearance. The sound of the door opening made her heart stop. Nate strode in, already perfectly put together in a fresh charcoal suit. His face wore the same expression he used for difficult board meetings. Distant, controlled, unreadable. "Good morning, Miss Carter." His voice was cool, professional, as if last night had never happened. As if he hadn't whispered her name against her skin just hours ago. The formal address hit her like a slap. Alyssa stood, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "Mr. Callahan," she responded, proud that her voice didn't shake. He moved to his desk, not quite looking at her. "The Anderson meeting is in an hour. I'll need the final documents ready." Alyssa felt something inside her crack. "Of course," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'll have them on your desk in 15 minutes. She bent to retrieve her shoes, cursing herself for every fantasy she'd ever had about this man. What had she expected? That one night would change who he was? That Nathaniel Callahan, Boston's golden boy and Wall Street's rising star, would suddenly throw away everything for his assistant? "Ms. Carter." His voice stopped her at the door. She turned, hope fluttering traitorously in her chest. But his eyes remained fixed on his computer screen. Last night was a lapse in judgment, one that won't be repeated. The words fell like ice between them. Alyssa lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how deeply they cut. "Understood, Mr. Callahan. It won't affect our working relationship." She walked to her desk with measured steps, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. Only when she was seated did she allow herself to feel the full weight of what had happened and what hadn't. The next hours passed in a blur of professional efficiency. She delivered the Anderson documents, coordinated meetings, and answered emails with mechanical precision. If her hands shook slightly when she handed him his afternoon coffee, neither of them acknowledged it. By evening, Alyssa had made her decision. She opened a new document and began typing. "Dear Mr. Callahan, please accept this letter as formal notice of my resignation." The words blurred on the screen as tears threatened to fall. She blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry, not here, not where he might see. "Is everything all right, Miss Carter?" Alyssa looked up to find Olivia Martinez, one of the junior executives, watching her with concern. "I'm fine," she said automatically, closing the resignation letter. "Just tired. You look a little pale. Maybe you should go home early." Home. The word echoed hollowly. Her apartment in Brooklyn felt impossibly far away. "I have a few things to finish first." But as the office emptied and the sky outside darkened, Alyssa found herself unable to complete the letter. Every attempt felt like admitting defeat. She had worked too hard to let one night, one mistake, drive her away. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, you're twice as good as any of them. Don't you ever let anyone make you run." The nausea that had been building all day suddenly intensified. Alyssa barely made it to the bathroom before emptying her stomach. As she knelt on the cold tile floor, a terrible suspicion began to form. No, it couldn't be. They had been careful, hadn't they? In the heat of the moment, had they? Her hands shaking, she pulled up her calendar app. The dates stared back at her, damning in their clarity. She was late. Not by much, but for someone as regular as clockwork. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alyssa gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow. Scared, yes, but also stronger than she'd realized. She wouldn't run, but she wouldn't stay either. Not like this. Not with his dismissive words still ringing in her ears. Walking back to her desk, she opened a new browser tab and began searching for executive assistant positions. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before adding one more search. Early pregnancy symptoms. The city lights twinkled outside, unchanged by the seismic shifts happening within these walls. In his office, Nate was still working, the glow of his computer screen casting shadows across his face. He looked up briefly, his eyes meeting hers through the glass. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Regret, longing, but then he turned away, and the moment was gone. Alyssa touched her stomach, not quite believing what might be growing there. If her suspicions were right, everything would change. But one thing was certain, she would face whatever came next on her own terms. She began typing again, this time with purpose. Dear Mr. Callahan, please accept this letter as formal notice of my resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. This time, she finished the letter. Her hands were steady as she printed it out, the paper warm against her fingers. Tomorrow, she would place it on his desk before he arrived. Tomorrow, she would begin planning for a future she had never imagined. But tonight, she allowed herself one last moment of weakness. Standing at her desk, she looked at him through the glass walls of his office, the man who had turned her world upside down and would never know just how completely. Goodbye, Nate, she whispered, gathering her things. Then she walked to the elevator, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that sounded like endings, and perhaps, though she didn't know it yet, beginnings too. 8 months had passed since Alyssa walked out of Callahan Enterprises, each day bringing new challenges and revelations. Now, standing in her Brooklyn apartment's bathroom, she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her hand rested on her prominent baby bump, visible even through her silk nightgown. The morning sickness had finally subsided, replaced by a different kind of discomfort, the weight of impending motherhood and unspoken truths. You're going to be late for your appointment, baby girl, her grandmother, Rose, called from the kitchen. The smell of ginger tea wafted through the apartment, a remedy that had helped Alyssa through her roughest morning sickness days. Coming, Gran, she replied, giving herself one last look. Her curls were pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup subtle but perfect. Old habits died hard. She might have left the corporate world, but she refused to let go of the standards she'd set for herself. The drive to Manhattan General was quiet, Rose humming gospel tunes under her breath while Alyssa checked her emails on her phone. Her new job at Morrison Global allowed her to work remotely most days, a blessing given her condition. But even now, she couldn't help but scan the business news, her heart skipping whenever Callahan Enterprises made headlines. You still haven't told him, Rose said, not a question but a statement. Her grandmother had never been one to dance around difficult topics. Alyssa's fingers tightened around her phone. He made it clear where we stood. Gran, the baby and I are better off without. Breaking news. Callahan Enterprises CEO announces major healthcare acquisition. Her phone's news alert cut through her words. The headline was accompanied by a photo that made her breath catch. Nate stood at a podium, looking every bit the powerful CEO in a navy suit that she knew would be perfectly tailored. His steel blue eyes seemed to pierce through the screen, stirring memories she'd tried so hard to bury. He's buying St. Clair's Hospital, Alyssa whispered, scanning the article. The entire healthcare network. Rose's knowing look spoke volumes. The same hospital where you're planning to deliver? Before Alyssa could respond, they pulled into the hospital parking lot. The modern glass building loomed before them, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if this was fate's idea of a cruel joke. The ultrasound room was cool and dim, the technician cheerful as she spread gel across Alyssa's stomach. Ready to see your little one? Alyssa nodded, her throat tight. Every appointment brought a mix of joy and guilt. Joy at seeing her baby, guilt at keeping such a secret. Oh my, the technician's voice held a note of surprise. Look at that profile, strong jawline, just like. She caught herself, glancing at Alyssa's chart where father not listed was clearly marked. But Alyssa had seen it too. Even in the grainy black and white image, there was no mistaking those features. Her son, and she'd known it was a boy for 2 months now, had his father's jawline. Later, sitting in Dr. Rivera's office, Alyssa tried to focus on the routine questions about her pregnancy, but her mind kept drifting to the news article, to Nate's expansion into healthcare. Was it just business, or did he somehow know? Your blood pressure's a bit elevated, Dr. Rivera noted, frowning at her chart. So have you been experiencing any unusual stress? Rose snorted softly from her chair in the corner. Alyssa shot her a warning look. Just work stuff, she lied. Dr. Rivera didn't look convinced. Well, with your due date approaching, we need to be extra careful. I want you to start coming in weekly now. Walking out of the hospital, Alyssa's phone buzzed with another news alert. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the headline, Nathaniel Callahan to personally oversee St. Clair's transition, effective immediately. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Rose muttered, reading over her shoulder. Looks like your secret's about to get a lot harder to keep. Alyssa's hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. It's a big hospital, Gran. What are the chances? In my experience, Rose cut in, the things we run from have a way of running right back into us. Back home, Alyssa sat at her small desk, trying to focus on work, but her eyes kept drifting to the ultrasound photos propped against her laptop. Her son's profile, Nate's profile, seemed to watch her accusingly. Her phone lit up with a text from Olivia, her former colleague at Callahan Enterprises. Girl, you won't believe what's happening here. The boss is going crazy about this hospital acquisition. Never seen him so hands-on about anything. You okay? Haven't heard from you in a while. Alyssa's finger hovered over the reply button. How could she explain that she was carrying the CEO's child, that every time she felt her baby kick, she thought about the man who didn't know he was about to be a father? Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching other hospitals in the area. But as she scrolled through options, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The things we run from have a way of running right back into us. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, as if agreeing. Alyssa pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the movement that had become so familiar. I'm just trying to protect you, she whispered. But as the sun set over Brooklyn, casting long shadows across her apartment, she wondered who she was really protecting. The baby? Herself? Or the man whose heart she'd seen beneath the corporate armor, if only for one night? Her phone buzzed again. Another news alert about Callahan Enterprises. This time, the photo showed Nate touring St. Clair's maternity ward. He was smiling, but Alyssa knew that smile. It didn't reach his eyes, just like it hadn't that morning after their night together. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Alyssa closed her eyes, remembering the vulnerability in Nate's voice when he'd whispered her name, the way his hands had trembled despite his usual control. There had been real feelings there, hadn't there? Or had she imagined it all? Your daddy's a complicated man, she told her bump, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. But you're going to be here soon, and then everything will change. She just didn't know how right she was. The contractions hit during a conference call. Alyssa had been in the middle of presenting quarterly projections to Morrison Global's executive team when the first wave of pain crashed through her body. She managed to maintain her composure, finishing her presentation with gritted teeth, but by the time she hung up, her water had broken. Gran! She called out, her voice tight with panic. It's time! The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Rose's calm efficiency took over, directing the Uber driver to St. Clair's Hospital, while Alyssa breathed through increasingly intense contractions. They had planned to deliver at Mount Sinai, far from any chance of running into Nate, but the baby had other plans. Just breathe, baby girl, Rose soothed, holding her hand as they wheeled her into the labor and delivery unit. Everything's going to be fine. But nothing was fine. Through the haze of pain, Alyssa noticed the fresh paint on the walls, the new equipment, all bearing the Callahan Enterprises logo. Her worst fear and secret were about to collide in the worst possible way. Dr. Rivera met them in the delivery room, her face concerned. The baby's heart rate is elevated, she announced after checking the monitors, and your blood pressure is too high. We need to prep for an emergency C-section. The word sent a spike of fear through Alyssa's heart. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She wasn't ready. She hadn't prepared for this. She hadn't... Mrs. Carter, a nurse appeared at her bedside. We need your emergency contact information for the forms. I'm her grandmother, Rose started to say, but the nurse shook her head. Hospital policy requires us to notify the father, if he's listed. Alyssa's next contraction hit so hard she saw stars. Through the pain, she heard Dr. Rivera's voice. The father isn't... Nathaniel Callahan. The words escaped before Alyssa could stop them, torn from her by pain and fear. The father is Nathaniel Callahan. The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of monitors. Then everything exploded into motion. Did she say Callahan? As in our new CEO? Someone page administration. blood pressure rising. "We need to move now." Alyssa caught fragments of conversation as they wheeled her toward the operating room. Rose's face appeared above her, worried but determined. "Baby girl, are you sure about this? If something happens—" Alyssa gasped through another contraction. "He needs to know. The baby needs to know his father." The operating room lights were blindingly bright. As the anesthesiologist prepared to administer the spinal block, Alyssa heard commotion in the hallway. Then a voice she'd tried so hard to forget cut through the chaos. "What do you mean, my child? I don't have a—" Nate's voice stopped abruptly. Through the door's window, Alyssa saw him frozen in place, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled, as if he'd run all the way from his office. His eyes locked onto her through the glass, and the world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. The door burst open. Nate strode in, still in his suit, but now wearing surgical scrubs over it. His face was a storm of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and something else. Something that made Alyssa's heart twist. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. Before she could answer, another contraction seized her, and the monitors began beeping urgently. "Mr. Callahan." Dr. Rivera's voice was sharp. "We need to operate now. Either step out or stay quiet." To everyone's surprise, including Alyssa's, Nate moved to her side. His hand found hers, warm and steady despite the tremor she felt in his fingers. "I'm staying," he said, his eyes never leaving Alyssa's face. The next few minutes were a blur of sensation. The cold antiseptic on her skin, the pressure of the spinal block, the strange tugging feeling as they operated. Through it all, Nate's hand remained in hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm just like he had that night so long ago. Then, cutting through the haze of medication and emotion, a strong cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Dr. Rivera announced. A beautiful, healthy boy. Alyssa couldn't see past the surgical drape, but she could see Nate's face as he looked at their son for the first time. The careful mask he always wore cracked completely, revealing raw wonder and love that took her breath away. "He's perfect," Nate whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Then his eyes met hers, and the storm of feelings there made her heart stop. "He's ours." The baby was cleaned and wrapped, then brought to them. As Alyssa held her son for the first time, she saw what the ultrasound had hinted at. He was undeniably Nate's child, from the strong jawline to the already serious expression. "Alexander," she said softly, the name she'd chosen months ago. Alexander Rose Callahan. Nate's sharp intake of breath made her look up. His eyes were suspiciously bright as he reached out to touch their son's tiny hand. "You gave him my name." "He was always yours too," Alyssa admitted, tears finally spilling over. "I was just scared." "We have a lot to talk about," Nate said, his voice gentle but firm. The anger wasn't gone. She could see it simmering beneath the surface, but it was tempered by something stronger. "But right now, our son needs us both." As if in agreement, Alexander grabbed his father's finger with surprising strength. The gesture seemed to undo Nate completely. He pressed his forehead to Alyssa's, his breath shaky. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. "Both of you." Outside the operating room, the hospital continued its busy routine. Somewhere, board members were probably having fits about their CEO's sudden disappearance. Rumors were likely already spreading through both their companies, but in that moment, none of it mattered. They had created something larger than themselves, something that would force them to face all the feelings they'd tried to bury. As Alexander drifted to sleep in Alyssa's arms, Nate still holding his tiny hand, she realized there was no more running. The truth was out, raw and beautiful and terrifying. What came next would test them both in ways they'd never imagined. But for now, in the quiet of the operating room, they were just three people beginning a journey none of them had expected. The private suite at St. Clair's Hospital felt more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Nate had insisted on the best accommodations, his efficient assistant having transformed the room with fresh flowers and premium amenities within hours of Alexander's birth. But no amount of luxury could ease the tension that crackled between the new parents. Alyssa sat in the hospital bed, carefully adjusting Alexander against her chest as he nursed. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over her son's dark curls. She could hardly believe he was real, this perfect blend of her and Nate, with his father's strong features softened by sleep. "The board meeting's been postponed." Nate's voice broke the silence. He stood by the window, his suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, an echo of that night 9 months ago. He hadn't left the hospital since Alexander's birth 24 hours earlier, though she'd seen him constantly on his phone, managing the chaos their situation had undoubtedly created. "You don't have to stay," Alyssa said softly, not meeting his eyes. "We're fine here." His laugh was sharp, humorless. "Fine? Is that what we're calling this?" He turned to face her, his steel blue eyes intense. "You kept my son from me for 9 months, Alyssa. None of this is fine." Alexander stirred at his father's raised voice, and Alyssa instinctively curled around him protectively. The gesture wasn't lost on Nate. His expression softened slightly as he watched their son, but the tension in his jaw remained. "I did what I thought was best," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Best?" He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "You didn't think I had a right to know, to be there for the appointments, the ultrasounds, to help you through the morning sickness. Would you have been?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Or would it have been like that morning after? Just another lapse in judgment to be managed. The words hung between them, heavy with 9 months of unspoken pain. Nate flinched as if she'd struck him. "You don't know what I would have done," he said, his voice low and intense. "You didn't give me the chance." Before Alyssa could respond, the door opened. Rose walked in, stopping short when she felt the tension in the room. "I brought your favorite tea, baby girl," she said, setting a cup on the bedside table. Her eyes moved between Alyssa and Nate, assessing. "Thank you, Gran." Alyssa managed a smile, grateful for the interruption. Alexander finished nursing, and Rose stepped forward. "Let me take him for a bit. You two clearly have things to discuss." Alyssa hesitated, but her grandmother's expression brooked no argument. With practiced ease, Rose scooped up Alexander, cooing softly. "Come on, little man. Let's give your mama and daddy some time to sort themselves out." The door closed behind them with a gentle click, leaving Alyssa and Nate truly alone for the first time since the birth. "Your grandmother knew?" Nate asked, running a hand through his usually perfect hair. "Who else?" "Just Dr. Rivera." Alyssa adjusted her hospital gown, missing the weight of Alexander in her arms. "I didn't tell anyone at work, not even Olivia." His question surprised her. She'd forgotten how observant he was, how he noticed the small details of his employees' lives. "No one," she repeated. "I left Callahan Enterprises before I started showing." Nate moved to sit in the chair beside her bed, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne. The scent brought back memories she'd tried so hard to suppress. His hands in her hair, his lips on her neck, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer. "I looked for you," he said quietly, the admission seeming to cost him something. "After you left. But you'd changed your number, moved apartments. I didn't want to be found." "Why?" His voice cracked slightly on the word. "Was that night really so terrible? Did I hurt you somehow?" The vulnerability in his question made her heart ache. "No," she whispered. "That night was perfect. It was the morning after that broke me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by regret. "I panicked," he admitted. "I'd wanted you for so long, fought so hard against it because you were my employee, because I thought it would complicate everything. Then that night happened, and it was more than I'd ever imagined, and I got scared." Nathaniel Callahan scared. She tried for sarcasm, but her voice trembled. "Terrified," he corrected, reaching for her hand. She let him take it, his thumb finding that spot on her palm that always made her shiver. "You made me feel things I couldn't control. For a man who built his life on control, it was easier to push me away," she finished. "Easier, yes, but not better." His eyes met hers, raw with honesty. "I've regretted that morning every day since." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered with Alexander's chart, and the moment shattered. Nate dropped her hand, standing to pace by the window again. "The pediatrician will be by soon," the nurse informed them, checking monitors. "And Mr. Callahan, your assistant, called. The press is gathering outside. They're asking for a statement about the baby." Reality crashed back in. Of course there would be press. The CEO of Callahan Enterprises having a secret baby with his former executive assistant. It was the kind of scandal that would dominate business news for weeks. "I'll handle it," Nate said, his CEO mask slipping back into place. But when the nurse left, he turned back to Alyssa, his expression softening. "We need to talk about how we're going to handle this, all of it." "I won't keep you from him," Alyssa said quickly. "We can work out a custody arrangement." "Stop," his voice was sharp. "Is that what you think I want? Some cold, legal arrangement where we pass our son back and forth like a business contract? What do you want, Nate?" She was tired, emotionally drained and suddenly terrified of his answer. He moved to her bedside again, sitting closer this time. "I want to know my son. I want to be there for every moment I've already missed. I want—" He broke off, struggling with words in a way she'd never seen before. "I want a chance to prove that mourning wasn't who I really am, that I can be the man you saw that night, the one who wasn't afraid to feel something real." Before she could respond, Rose returned with Alexander. The baby was fussing, his little face scrunched up in displeasure. Without thinking, Nate reached for him, and Rose placed Alexander in his father's arms. The transformation was immediate. Alexander quieted, looking up at Nate with unfocused eyes. Nate's entire body softened as he held his son, wonder replacing the tension in his features. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad. I'm sorry I'm late to the party, but I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Watching them together, Alyssa felt tears slip down her cheeks. Rose squeezed her shoulder gently. "Sometimes," her grandmother murmured, "the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves." The sun continued its journey across the sky, casting long shadows in the hospital room. Outside, reporters waited for their story. Somewhere, board members and executives were demanding explanations. But inside this room, something was shifting, changing, healing. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Callahan Enterprises CEO's secret love child, business world shocked by hidden romance. From executive assistant to mother of billion-dollar baby, Wall Street's most eligible bachelor no more. Nathaniel Callahan's hidden family revealed. The headlines screamed from every business publication and gossip site, each more sensational than the last. Alyssa scrolled through them on her phone, her stomach churning as she sat in the back of Nate's bulletproof SUV. Alexander slept peacefully in his car seat, blissfully unaware of the media frenzy surrounding his existence. "Don't read that trash," Nate said from beside her, not looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing the press statement his PR team had prepared. He'd insisted on driving them home from the hospital himself, though his security team followed in separate vehicles. "Easy for you to say," Alyssa replied, her voice tight. "You're being painted as the powerful CEO with a secret passion. I'm being called a gold digger who trapped you with a baby." Nate's head snapped up, his eyes flashing dangerously. "What? Show me." "It doesn't matter." She locked her phone, turning to check on Alexander instead. Their son's peaceful face centered her, reminding her what was truly important. "It matters to me." Nate's voice was soft but intense. He closed his laptop, shifting closer to her in the back seat. "Alyssa, look at me." She did, struck again by how different he looked from his usual corporate self. He'd forgone his suit jacket, his crisp white shirt wrinkled from hours at the hospital. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit she'd forgotten about. "No one gets to paint you as anything less than what you are," he said firmly. "You're brilliant, capable, and you've carried and protected our son alone for 9 months. If anyone tries to smear your name—" "You can't control everything, Nate," she interrupted gently. "Especially not now." The truth of her words seemed to hit him hard. Control had always been his shield, his way of managing a world that had taught him early that vulnerability was weakness. But a baby changed everything. As if to prove her point, Alexander chose that moment to wake up crying, the sharp, hungry wail that Alyssa had quickly learned to recognize. Without thinking, she reached for him, but Nate was faster. "I've got him," he said, carefully unbuckling the car seat. His large hands looked almost comically gentle as he lifted their son, supporting his head with practiced care. He'd made the nurses show him exactly how to hold the baby properly. "He's hungry," Alyssa explained, already reaching for the nursing cover in her bag. "Here, let me—" "Sir," Nate's driver called from the front, "we have paparazzi ahead." Sure enough, a group of photographers had gathered outside Alyssa's Brooklyn apartment building. Nate's jaw tightened as he looked at them through the tinted windows. "Take us to my penthouse instead," he ordered, then turned to Alyssa. "It's secure, private, and has better security, just until this dies down. Nate, please." His voice was soft, almost pleading. "Let me protect you both, just for now." Alexander's cries grew more insistent. Alyssa looked at the photographers, then at her son's red face, and nodded. Just for now. The drive to Manhattan was tense, broken only by Alexander's feeding and Nate's quiet phone calls arranging for Alyssa's essentials to be brought from her apartment. By the time they pulled into the private garage of his building, the sun was setting over the city. Nate's penthouse was exactly as she'd imagined it would be. Sleek, modern, and impeccably decorated in shades of grey and blue, but something was different. "Is that a nursery?" she asked, spotting the open door down the hall. Nate shifted Alexander in his arms, looking almost embarrassed. "I had it set up while you were in the hospital. The designer worked through the night." "I know I should have asked, but—" Alyssa walked to the room, her heart stopping when she saw it. The space was perfect. Warm grey walls with white trim, a state-of-the-art crib, a comfortable glider, and a changing table stocked with everything they could need. But what caught her eye was the wall art, a collection of framed ultrasound photos. "How did you get these?" she whispered. "Dr. Rivera," Nate admitted, coming to stand beside her. "I wanted him to have every moment, even the ones I missed." Tears pricked at her eyes. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "CNN breaking news about you two. Call me when you can." Reality crashed back in. Alyssa moved to the living room, turning on the massive TV that dominated one wall. Sure enough, their story was everywhere. In breaking business news, Callahan Enterprises stock has responded positively to CEO Nathaniel Callahan's surprise fatherhood announcement, the anchor was saying. Sources close to the company suggest this personal development might soften Callahan's notorious hard-edge image. "Turn it off," Nate said, handing Alexander to her. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration visible. "This isn't how I wanted it to be." "How did you want it to be?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes full of things unsaid. I wanted to do it right this time. To be the man you deserved that morning after. To build something real, not just react to a crisis." "And now?" "Now." He moved closer, reaching out to touch Alexander's tiny hand. Their son gripped his father's finger with surprising strength. "Now I want to prove that sometimes the things we don't plan turn out to be exactly what we need." The moment was interrupted by both their phones buzzing simultaneously, his PR team and her grandmother, all demanding attention. Outside one, the city lights began to twinkle on, and somewhere, reporters were still spinning their story into headlines. But in that moment, watching Nate make silly faces at their son while still holding his finger, Alyssa felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't the careful, controlled fall into love she might have once dreamed of. It was messy, complicated, and completely public. It was also, perhaps, exactly what they both needed to finally break down the walls they'd built around their hearts. "We should probably feed him again before bed," she said softly. "I'll warm up the bottle you pumped earlier," Nate replied, already heading to the kitchen with the efficiency that made him such a successful CEO. "Nate!" she called after him. He turned, one eyebrow raised in question. "Thank you, for the nursery, for trying." His smile, soft and real, was nothing like his corporate mask. "Always, Alyssa, always." 3 weeks into their temporary arrangement, Alyssa woke to the sound of Nate's voice drifting through the baby monitor. It was 3 a.m., and instead of calling for the night nurse he'd insisted on hiring, he was handling Alexander's feeding himself. "And that's how hostile takeovers work, buddy," she heard him saying softly. "But don't worry. Daddy's going to teach you how to be a better kind of businessman. One who builds things up instead of tearing them down." Alyssa slipped out of the guest room, though it was more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever stayed in, and padded down the hallway. She paused in the nursery doorway, her heart catching at the sight before her. Nate sat in the glider, his silk pajama top unbuttoned to hold Alexander against his bare chest for skin-to-skin contact, just as the pediatrician had recommended. His hair was tousled from sleep, and his usual sharp edges were softened by exhaustion, and something else, something that looked remarkably like peace. "Your mama taught me that," he continued, unaware of her presence. "She never compromised her integrity, never let power corrupt her spirit. That's why I fell—" He caught himself, finally noticing her in the doorway. Hey," she replied softly, moving into the room. "You didn't have to get up. That's why we have the nurse. I wanted to—" His voice was rough with fatigue, but his eyes were clear as they met hers. "I've missed too much already." Alexander made a small sound of contentment, his tiny hand splayed across his father's chest. The sight made Alyssa's throat tight. This wasn't the Nate Callahan that Wall Street knew, the ruthless CEO, the master strategist. This was just a father, learning to love in ways that terrified and transformed him. "You're good with him," she said, perching on the ottoman near the glider. "I had a good teacher." His smile was soft, genuine. You make it look so natural. Trust me, I'm terrified half the time." The admission slipped out easily in the pre-dawn quiet. "Every time he cries, every time he gets a little warm, I worry I'm doing something wrong." "You're amazing with him." Nate's voice carried absolute conviction. "You're strong, patient, loving, everything he needs. Everything." The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Nate's eyes darkened. "Alyssa?" A cry from the kitchen interrupted them, the bottle warmer signaling it was done. Alyssa stood quickly. "I'll get it." She escaped to the kitchen, her heart pounding. These moments kept happening. Quiet, intimate exchanges that threatened to crack the careful walls they'd built. Living together, even temporarily, made it harder to maintain professional distance. She found the bottle and tested the temperature on her wrist, a motion that had become second nature. When she returned to the nursery, she stopped short. Nate had stood up and was swaying gently with Alexander, humming what sounded suspiciously like an Eminem song under his breath. "Really?" She couldn't help but smile. "I'll lose yourself as a lullaby." "Hey, it's never too early to learn about seizing opportunities," he defended, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. He reached for the bottle, but she shook her head. "Let me." She held out her arms for Alexander. The transfer of their son between them brought them close, too close. Nate's scent enveloped her, familiar and intoxicating. His fingers brushed her arms as he handed over the baby, and the touch sent electricity through her body. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and intimate in the dim room. "Maybe we should make this arrangement permanent." Alyssa's head snapped up. "What? Not like that." He backtracked quickly, running a hand through his hair. "I mean, the penthouse has better security. It's closer to both our offices, and Alexander already has his nursery set up here. You could have the entire East Wing, complete privacy. It would be easier for both of us to be present in his life. Living together," her voice came out shakier than she intended. "Nate, we can barely make it through dinner without the tension." "What tension?" He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "The tension of pretending we don't feel anything, of acting like that night meant nothing, of ignoring the fact that every time I see you with our son, I fall." "Don't," she cut him off, clutching Alexander closer. "Don't say things you can't take back in the morning." Pain flashed across his face. "I deserved that," he admitted quietly. "But Alyssa, I'm not that man anymore. That morning, I was a coward. I let fear dictate my actions, and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." "Which best thing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That night, or this?" She nodded toward Alexander, who was contentedly drinking his bottle, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing around him. "Both." Nate's honesty was disarming. "Everything. You gave me everything I never knew I needed, and I threw it away because I was too scared to admit what I felt." A notification chimed on his phone, probably another email from the office. The sound seemed to break the spell of the moment. Alyssa stepped back, creating distance between them. "We should focus on Alexander," she said, falling back on practicality. "That's what matters now." "Is it?" Nate challenged softly. "Is that all that matters between us?" Before she could answer, Alexander finished his bottle and began fussing. The familiar routine of burping and changing him gave Alyssa a moment to collect herself. By the time she laid him back in his crib, she had her emotions under control again, or so she thought, until she turned to find Nate watching her with an expression that made her heart stop. "You're right," he said, moving toward the door. "We should focus on Alexander. But Alyssa," he paused in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the hallway light, "I'm not giving up this time, on any of it." He left her there, standing in the nursery with her sleeping son and a heart full of dangerous hope. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city beginning to wake, the first hints of dawn painting the sky in shades of promise. "Your daddy's going to be trouble," she whispered to Alexander. "He's going to make me believe in second chances." The baby slept on, peaceful and perfect, while his parents grappled with feelings too big for the careful boxes they'd tried to put them in. Outside, another day was beginning in the city that never sleeps, but inside the penthouse, something else was awakening, something that felt dangerously like love. The call came during a board meeting. Nate was in the middle of presenting Callahan Enterprises' quarterly projections when his private line rang, the one reserved for family emergencies. His heart stopped when he saw the caller ID, St. Clair's Hospital. "Alexander's running a high fever." Alyssa's voice was tight with panic. "The pediatrician wants us to bring him in immediately." The next hour was a blur. Nate vaguely remembered barking orders to postpone the meeting, his carefully maintained CEO composure cracking as he raced to the hospital. By the time he arrived, Alyssa was already in the pediatric emergency room, cradling their 6-week-old son, who looked impossibly small under the harsh fluorescent lights. "What happened?" he demanded, striding into the room. His tie was loose, shirt sleeves rolled up, the perfect image of corporate control completely abandoned. "He was fine this morning," Alyssa said, her voice shaking. "Then he wouldn't eat, and he felt so hot." Before she could finish, the medical team swept in. What followed was a nightmare of tests, questions, and terrifying medical terms. Alexander's cries grew weaker as nurses drew blood and attached monitoring equipment, each whimper cutting through his parents like physical pain. "We need to start IV antibiotics," the pediatrician announced. "His white blood cell count is elevated, suggesting a possible infection. We'll need to admit him for observation." Alyssa's legs gave out. Nate caught her, guiding her to a chair while keeping his eyes fixed on their son. "Do whatever's necessary," he ordered, his CEO voice taking over. "Money is no object." Hours passed in the private pediatric suite. Alexander's fever remained stubbornly high despite the medications. Alyssa hadn't left his side, her fingers constantly stroking his dark curls, while Nate paced the room like a caged tiger. "You should rest," he told her around midnight, noting the exhaustion in her face. "I'll stay with him." "I'm not leaving him," she said firmly. "Alyssa, don't." Her voice cracked. "Don't try to control this, Nate. You can't fix everything with money and orders." The words hit him like a physical blow. "You think that's what I'm doing? Isn't it?" She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's what you always do. When things get emotional, you try to manage them like a business deal." "That's not fair." He moved closer, his own fear and frustration bubbling to the surface. "He's my son too. I'm terrified too." "Are you?" she challenged. "Because all I see is Nathaniel Callahan, CEO, throwing around orders and money like that's going to make everything better. What do you want from me?" His voice rose slightly, then immediately dropped as Alexander stirred. "How am I supposed to act when my son is sick and there's nothing I can do to fix it? I want you to feel it." The words burst from her like they'd been held back too long. "I want you to stop hiding behind your corporate mask and just be human. Be a father. Be—" She trailed off, looking away. "Be what?" He stepped closer, close enough to see the tears clinging to her lashes. "Be the man you fell in love with that night." The monitor, measuring Alexander's heart rate, beeped steadily in the silence that followed his words. "You don't get to talk about that night," Alyssa whispered. "Not now." "Then when?" Nate's control finally snapped. "When do we talk about the fact that I'm in love with you? That I've been in love with you since before that night? That watching you with our son makes me fall deeper every day?" "Stop it." Her voice was barely audible. "You're just emotional because Alexander's sick." "No." He knelt beside her chair, forcing her to look at him. "I'm emotional because my son is sick and because the woman I love won't let me in, won't trust that I've changed, won't believe that losing you both is my greatest fear." A soft whimper from the crib interrupted them. They both turned to find Alexander's eyes open, glazed with fever but seeking them out. Without discussion, they moved to either side of the crib, their hands meeting as they reached to comfort their son. "It's okay, baby," Alyssa soothed, her free hand stroking his cheek. "Mama and Daddy are here." "We're not going anywhere," Nate added, his thumb absently caressing Alyssa's fingers where they met over their son. The next hours passed in a haze of worry and exhaustion. Around dawn, Alexander's fever finally broke. The pediatrician confirmed the antibiotics were working, and the infection was responding to treatment. Relief made Alyssa's knees weak. This time, when Nate caught her, she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned into his embrace, letting out a sob against his chest. "He's okay," Nate murmured into her hair, his own voice thick with emotion. "Our boy's okay." "I was so scared," she admitted, her fingers clutching his shirt. "Me too." The confession came easily now, his walls finally crumbling. "When I got that call, I've never been more terrified in my life." She pulled back slightly to look at him, really look at him. His hair was a mess from running his hands through it, his eyes red-rimmed from worry, his tie long since discarded. He looked nothing like the polished CEO who had shut her out that morning so long ago. "You've changed," she whispered, almost to herself. "Love changes people." His hands framed her face, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You and Alexander, you've changed everything." The monitors beeped softly in the background. Outside, the city was coming alive with another day. But in that hospital room, time seemed to stand still as Nate lowered his head, his lips hovering just above hers. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, echoing words from their first night together. This time, Alyssa answered by closing the distance herself. The kiss was gentle, tender, filled with all the fear and relief and love they'd been holding back. When they parted, Alexander made a small sound of contentment, as if approving of his parents finally finding their way back to each other. "We still have a lot to talk about," Alyssa said softly, but her hands remained on Nate's chest, feeling his heart beat under her palms. "We have time," he promised, pressing his forehead to hers. "All the time in the world." In the crib, Alexander drifted back to sleep, his fever gone, his tiny face peaceful. His parents stood watch over him, their hands entwined, their hearts finally beginning to heal. 2 days after Alexander's release from the hospital, reality came knocking in the form of Patricia Winston, head of Callahan Enterprises' PR department. She arrived at the penthouse just as Alyssa was finishing Alexander's morning feeding, Nate watching them both with undisguised tenderness from his position on the couch. "We need to discuss your public image," Patricia announced without preamble, spreading magazines across the coffee table. "First, the press is having a field day with speculation about your relationship status." The headlines screamed for attention: "Callahan's secret family, wedding bells in the future. Inside the love story that shocked Wall Street. Power couple in the making. Will romance heal the rift?" Alyssa felt the peaceful bubble they'd been living in start to crack. The past 2 days had been almost dreamlike, sharing gentle kisses over Alexander's crib, falling asleep together on the couch during late-night feedings, learning to be a family without the weight of their past hanging between them. "This isn't a priority right now," Nate said firmly, his hand finding Alyssa's on the couch. "Our son just got out of the hospital." "Which is exactly why we need to control the narrative," Patricia insisted. "That the board is concerned about stability. They need to know if you're planning to make this official, or if we should be preparing for a potential custody battle that could affect stock prices." "Get out!" Nate's voice was quiet, but carried the steel that had made him famous in boardrooms across the country. "But I said get out." He stood, every inch the CEO despite his casual clothing. "And if anyone on the board has concerns about my personal life affecting this company, remind them who built it into what it is today." After Patricia left, silence fell heavy in the penthouse. Alyssa looked down at Alexander, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the complications surrounding his parents' relationship. "I'm sorry about that," Nate said softly, sitting back down beside her. "So I should have known they wouldn't give us peace for long." "She's not entirely wrong," Alyssa admitted. "We need to figure out what this is between us, what we're going to be to each other." Nate turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "I know what I want us to be. I've known since that night in my office, even if I was too scared to admit it then." "Nate, let me finish." He took her free hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm that made her shiver. "That morning after, when I pushed you away, I convinced myself it was about protecting the company, maintaining professional boundaries. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. You made me feel things I couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't manage like one of my business deals. And now," her voice was barely a whisper, "now," he smiled, reaching out to stroke Alexander's cheek, "now I know that the best things in life are the ones you can't control. Our son taught me that, and you've shown me what real strength looks like. Not the kind that comes from power or money, but the kind that comes from loving completely, even when it's terrifying." Tears pricked at Alyssa's eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of loving you. I think I've loved you since before that night. I'm scared of trusting that this is real, that you won't wake up one morning and decide it's all too complicated again." Nate shifted closer, his forehead touching hers. "Then let me prove it to you. Every day, every moment, for as long as it takes. No more running, no more hiding behind corporate masks or professional distance. The press will be ruthless," she warned. "They'll dig into everything, my background, my family, our history. Let them." His voice was fierce. "I'm proud of who you are, of where you come from. I'm proud that you're the mother of my child, and I want the world to know that you're the woman who brought love and light into my life." Alexander stirred in her arms, making those little sounds that meant he was about to wake up hungry again. The moment was interrupted by both their phones buzzing, more messages from the PR team, the board, their families. "We should probably make some decisions," Alyssa said practically, even as her heart raced at Nate's words, "about how we want to handle this publicly. I have a suggestion." Nate stood, moving to his desk where he retrieved something from the drawer. When he turned back, Alyssa's breath caught. In his hand was a small blue velvet box. "Nata," she breathed, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done months ago." He knelt beside the couch, opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring. "This isn't about the press or the board or anyone else. This is about us, you, me, and our son. And this is about the fact that I want to wake up to your smile every morning, want to watch Alexander grow up with both his parents together, want to spend the rest of my life proving that love is worth more than control. Is this? When did you get this?" She couldn't take her eyes off the ring. "The day after Alexander was born," he admitted sheepishly. "I've been carrying it around ever since, waiting for the right moment. But I'm done waiting. I'm done letting fear hold me back from what I really want." Alexander chose that moment to fully wake up, his demanding cry filling the penthouse. They both laughed, the tension breaking. "Your timing needs work," Alyssa teased, adjusting their son to nurse. "Story of my life," Nate smiled, still holding the ring. "But I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to get it right this time. Alyssa Monique Carter, will you marry me? Not for the press, not for the board, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked between the man she loved and the son they'd created together. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, catching the morning light and throwing rainbows across Alexander's peaceful face as he nursed. Outside, the city buzzed with activity, unknowing that in a penthouse high above, a family was finally becoming whole. "The press is going to go crazy," Alyssa murmured, but she couldn't stop smiling. "Let them," Nate said, pulling her and Alexander into his arms. "Some things are worth the headlines." The winter sun painted Central Park in shades of gold and white, the fresh snow sparkling like diamonds. From the private room at the Plaza Hotel, Alyssa watched guests arriving for the wedding, their colorful coats dotting the pristine landscape below. "He's absolutely perfect in his little tuxedo," Rose cooed, holding 3-month-old Alexander. The baby looked dapper in his custom-made outfit, a miniature version of his father's, just like his daddy. Alyssa smiled, turning from the window. Her own reflection caught her breath. The elegant white gown hugged her curves perfectly, its sophisticated design a blend of modern elegance and timeless grace. "Speaking of his daddy," Rose's eyes twinkled, "that man's been trying to sneak in here all morning. Security had to turn him away twice." "Nathaniel Callahan stopped by security," Alyssa laughed. "That must be killing him. Some things even CEOs can't control," Rose said wisely, adjusting Alexander's tiny bow tie, like tradition and love. A knock at the door revealed Olivia, stunning in her maid-of-honor dress. "Everything's ready," she announced, then paused, taking in Alyssa's appearance. "Oh my God, you're gorgeous. Nate's going to lose it when he sees you." The ceremony space in the plaza's ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with crystal decorations catching the light from thousands of tiny bulbs. But as Alyssa stood at the entrance, her arm linked with her grandmother's, she barely noticed the decor. All she could see was Nate. He stood at the altar, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, but it was his expression that made her heart stop. Gone was the corporate mask, the careful control. His face showed pure love, wonder, and a vulnerability he now wore proudly. As she walked down the aisle, memories of their journey flashed through her mind. That first night in his office, the painful morning after, the months of separation, the dramatic revelation of Alexander's birth, the fear during his illness, and finally, the joy of finding their way back to each other. When she reached him, Nate took her hands in his thumbs brushing across her knuckles in that familiar gesture that had always made her shiver. "You take my breath away," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The ceremony began, but Alyssa barely heard the words. She was lost in Nate's eyes, in the love she saw there, in the promise of their future together. "Joysaker Nathaniel James Callahan," his voice was clear and strong as he began his vows, "spent my life building walls and maintaining control. Then you walked into my office with your brilliant mind and beautiful soul, and those walls began to crack. I fought it, tried to protect myself from feeling too much, and in doing so I almost lost everything that mattered. But you gave me a second chance. You and our incredible son showed me that real strength isn't about control. It's about having the courage to love without limits. I promised to spend every day proving worthy of that love, to be the husband and father you both deserve, and to never let fear stand in the way of us again." Tears slipped down Alyssa's cheeks as she began her own vows. I Simpruar Alyssa Monique Carter learned early that success meant being twice as good, twice as strong, twice as careful. I built my own walls, thinking they would protect me, but you saw through them, saw me, even when I was trying to hide. Our journey hasn't been easy or traditional, but it's been real. You've shown me that true love isn't about being perfect, it's about being perfectly matched, flaws and all. I promise to stand by you as your partner, your equal, to raise our son with all the love and strength we both bring to this family, and to never let go of the magic we create together. Rose stepped forward with Alexander, who immediately reached for both his parents. Laughter rippled through the guests as Nate took their son in his arms, holding him between them as they exchanged rings. "Owed by the power vested in me," the officiant smiled, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Nate's kiss was gentle but full of promise, one hand still holding Alexander, while the other cupped Alyssa's face. When they parted, their son's happy gurgle seemed to express everything their hearts were feeling. The reception was a blend of elegant sophistication and warm intimacy. The business world's elite mingled with Alyssa's family from Brooklyn, while Alexander was passed around like a precious treasure, charming everyone he met. "Mrs. Callahan," Nate's voice was warm in her ear as they shared their first dance. "How does it feel?" "Perfect," she smiled, then added with a teasing glint, "though I'm keeping Carter professionally. Can't have people thinking I slept my way to the top." His laugh was free and genuine, a sound that had become wonderfully common in recent months. "You're going to run that company one day," he said seriously, "because you're brilliant, not because you're my wife. One step at a time," she said softly. "We have a lifetime to figure it all out." Later, as the party wound down, they stood on the hotel's balcony. Alexander slept peacefully in Nate's arms, while snow fell gently around them. The city stretched out below, its lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. "Any regrets?" Alyssa asked, leaning into his side. "Just one," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I wasted so much time being afraid of this, of us." "No time was wasted," she said wisely. "Every moment led us here, made us who we are, gave us our son. Sometimes the longest road is the one that leads you home." Nate shifted Alexander to one arm so he could pull Alyssa closer. "You are my home," he whispered. "You and this little guy. Everything else, the company, the press, the expectations, it's just background noise." The snow continued to fall, dusting their shoulders with diamond-like crystals. Below, the last of the guests were leaving, their cars creating tracks in the fresh snow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new chapters in their story. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply a family. A man who had learned that love was stronger than control. A woman who had found that vulnerability could be its own kind of strength. And the beautiful baby boy who had brought them back together. "I love you," Nate murmured, his voice carrying all the emotion of their journey. "I love you too," Alyssa replied, her heart full of joy and promise. "Always." Alexander sighed in his sleep, his tiny hand gripping his father's lapel, while his other hand reached for his mother's finger. Even in sleep, he kept his parents connected, just as he had from the moment of his existence. Together they stood, watching the snow fall over their city, their love story written not in business deals or power plays, but in the quiet moments of truth, in the courage to feel deeply, and in the endless possibilities that lay ahead. For sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a business plan, but with a single night of letting go. And sometimes the most powerful empires are built not in boardrooms, but in the heart, where love rules without limits and family is the only bottom line that truly matters. The end. If you were in Alyssa's shoes, would you have hidden the pregnancy from Nate even after he hurt you that morning? Or do you believe that regardless of the pain, he had the right to know about the child from the start? Think about it. On the one hand, we have a hurt woman who was treated like a mistake after a special night. On the other, a man who, despite his fears and failings, had a right to know that he was going to be a father. Alyssa's fear was understandable. She didn't want her child to be treated as just another deal in Nate's life, but at the same time, hiding the pregnancy meant depriving both father and son of precious moments that will never come again. What would you do in this situation? Would you be able to forgive someone who had hurt you so deeply when you found out that they had changed? Or are some mistakes too big, to deserve a second chance. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.